downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
Kathy Burk grew up on a grape farm in California, but went into academia rather than agriculture, specialising in Anglo-American relations. Alongside her teaching and research, she continued to develop her love and knowledge of wine. Now a retired professor, she spent the last 5 years researching her remarkable new book, Wine, A Global History, which will be published in October. I caught up with her to hear all about it. Hello, Kathy, and welcome to the podcast.
And welcome to having me, Tim.
It's fantastic to hear your voice. Where are you? Somewhere glamorous in the world?
Well, I quite like Oxford. We're in a village south of Oxford, in fact. So I can come home from working in London and smell the roses.
Oh, what a beautiful idea. Any vineyards near you? Quite a few, I suppose.
Oh, no. I had one vine in my garden, but the grapes, I didn't pick it. Someone else did. And the grapes were tiny. They were sweet, but they were so full of pips. I was spending all my time spitting them out. So
picking them out of your teeth.
Yes, I'd wanted I'd wanted a nice, big, gorgeous muscat, but sadly, I've got what is now a dead red vine.
Oh dear! I mean, you were brought up surrounded by vineyards because you were brought up in California's San Joaquin Valley. You said you've got wine in your blood, really. Do you have early memories of that time? Were you out there working in the vineyards as a kid?
Sadly, yes, I was. We had something like 240 acres of vines. Well, vines plus some oranges and peaches and plums. Middle of the San Joaquin Valley, which was the particular county, Fresno, was the richest agricultural land in the world, in fact. And unfortunately, we were land poor, lots of kids, 6, very little cash coming in. So when it was harvest time, and indeed after harvest time, my 5 brothers and sisters and I had to go out to the vineyards and pick grapes with, I might add, it was not romantic. It had flies and spiders dripping down. We also had to tie vines, which was to put up the branches and put the ties around them. And we had sometimes drive tractor, which I did amazingly now from about the age of 6.
Wow.
Yes, I can do anything.
Amazing.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, it sounds romantic in retrospect. I remember when I first went to Oxford and several guys were saying, "Oh, we're off to Bordeaux for the harvest." And I thought, you idiots, you have no idea what you're getting yourself
How
in.
terrible it is.
So because it was hard labor and because we didn't drink wine at home. My father and mother, although they liked wine very much, they were too poor to provide it. They sent it to someone else.
Wow.
And so I didn't actually drink it till I got to Berkeley, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, you went to Berkeley to study history, not enology or viticulture, did you?
That's right, history and politics, or political science, as it's called in the United States. And I had a number of friends, and we'd gather in my room, or my boyfriend's who was in the same building, and we'd sit around, and I'd play the guitar, and we'd sing folk songs, and they smoked grass, weed, as we called it, cannabis, as you call it formally, but I was asthmatic, and also it made no effect on me. So I drank jug wine. I can't really remember what some of it was. I don't think I went so low as Gallo, but it was, Hardy Burgundy it was called.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, indeed.
And then you went from there to Oxford, didn't you, on a scholarship? And you started to learn about European wines. Did you have an early mentor, somebody who introduced you to those wines?
Well, sort of. My women's college didn't have central heating. So they decided to put it in. Thank you. We were always putting shillings in 3-bar heaters, which you may not remember. And so that summer, when they were going to put it in, my medieval history tutor hired me as an au pair in her house. And her husband was a philosophy don over at Christchurch, which had a rather famous cellar. And so he'd bring the odd bottle home so he could taste to see if it was worth buying, essentially. And there were times when he invited me in. And that's when I had my first actual, well, you call it mentoring. I call it being led by the hand and being shown how to taste wine, what I should do. And within a couple of years, I was on the wine committee of my college once I was what was called a junior research fellow. And it was less, I must admit, because of my palate, but because I was, half the age of most of the fellows and I could bin the wine. So it wasn't very flattering, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was really great that they thought I was good enough.
Yeah.
Now I know that I was strong enough to be part of the wine committee.
Fantastic. I mean, you went on to become a lecturer, then professor of modern and contemporary history at UCL. Very distinguished academic career, specialising in Anglo-American relations. But alongside this, you're still doing wine. You did the WCT diploma, you became a wine trade judge, you did trade competitions, and you co-authored a book about wine. Is this bottle corked? How did you fit it all in?
Well, yes, I didn't sleep much. It was great fun. I actually ran in the evenings how to taste wine for students. I made them pay £10 a week for it, which went for the wine, although I topped it up with wine from my own cellar. But I knew if they paid, they would take it seriously. And some of those, mostly, well, these were all chaps, are still good friends, and we meet for wine now and again. I'm meeting one in a couple of weeks. So that's fun. I'm not going to be remembered for the pearls of wisdom on Anglo-American relations that I dropped to them, but for my wine.
For the wine tastings, yeah.
Well, one of my filing cabinets was full of wine. They remember that.
Yeah. And is this bottle corked about? Was it a kind of consumer guide?
No, it was, I wrote it with a friend of mine, Michael Bywater, who was quite a famous journalist.
Yeah,
and
he is.
Incredibly brilliant man. And we just decided one day that we would do this. And essentially what it is 50 short, well, 2 or 3 of them are essays. For example, one of mine, Do You Need a Guru? Or what is terroir and does it matter? That sort of thing. But a lot of them were shorter, like what are wine diamonds, for example. It's the hard stuff in German wines, which in fact one German bottle said, "They do not hurt you. It is not a reason to send back the bottle." So and do we serve white wine too cold and red wine too hot? That sort of thing. And I think it did reasonably well. It had cartoons in it.
No, sounds great.
Well, produced by a cartoonist from the New Yorker. And those of you who read the New Yorker will know how great those are.
They certainly are. They're some of the best cartoons in the world. So that was your first book, first wine book. You've written other books as well, obviously. But your next book, and was sent a copy, and I've read the book, is unbelievable. This is Wine, A Global History. It's going to be published in October, so we're doing this podcast before it's out. I've put in my advance order, and I hope everyone will do the same. It feels like the book you were kind of always meant to write, about wine. How did it come about?
Well, it came about because my agent sent in a proposal for a book which goes around a number of publishers, and it was on money and the state. How the state uses its own funds to buy mercenaries and so forth, like in 14th century Italy. And Andrew Franklin of Profile Books, who was the publisher and owner, sent back an email saying, "Is this really the book that Kathy wants to write? Has she thought of writing a global history of wine?" People kill for that sort of opportunity. And
yes.
Exactly. And I just rotted around the room. And then, I'm not Daniel Steele or John Griffin, but he offered me what I thought was a handsome advance because he said, "You'll need some money to research." I thought, my sort of publisher. And I signed the contract in February 2001. So it's taken me 5 years full-time work to write.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to ask you, how long did it take you? Did you travel to write the book, or were you too busy doing the research in Oxford and London?
Well, I went to trade tastings in London and so forth. I didn't travel much because it was difficult to have the time to do both. It's rather a large book. And
It certainly
partway
is.
through, my editor thought I should do another chapter on another topic. But a number of things, sources are in, primary sources are published. They were mostly published in the 19th century or early 20th or 18th century in one case.
Yeah.
So I used those, plus hundreds of secondary sources, which I would read and take out what I needed. So my endnote section is seriously big. But
it's a very long bibliography, isn't it, at the back?
Indeed. Every book I used went in that bibliography, and every article. You just have to. I mean, if for no other reason, people who think they ought to be part of that sort of book will whip to the bibliography and see if their name is
right, well, I didn't, but there we go. I'm not in there.
I'm sorry.
How terrible.
I know we were going to be doing this. I would make sure.
You made sure I was in there, exactly.
Right.
Just tell us how you decided to structure the book, because it's mostly chronological, covering the last 8,000 years from the late Stone Age to 2025, bang up to date. But it's also thematic at times, isn't it? I mean, I just wondered, did the architecture of the book change as you did the research?
Not really. I mean, obviously, it had to start in the late Stone Age, as one would expect. And I went from there, to classical Greece and ancient Greece and classical Rome, and I went chronologically. But then, for example, I have a chapter on the complex relationship of Islam and wine, and that by itself is a chapter, and you can sort of interact with it, but essentially that's thematic. Or France, which required, I thought, 2 chapters for reasons which I need not explain to you, which was chronological mostly, but there was so much, it went to 2 chapters. The U.S. has 2 chapters from the beginning to the end, where I made one comment during Prohibition, which is part of the 2nd chapter. And from the early times, from Hippocrates, he of the oath, wine was used in medicine. And indeed, some wines were used in medicine till mid-19th century, although by that time they were called tonics. Well, there was one winery in California, Paul Masson, who produced what he called medicinal champagne, which was required for anyone who was ill in that sense, and they required large amounts of sparkling wine to.
So they sidestepped the Volstead Act, did they? By pretending it was good for you.
They did.
Yeah. I mean, a few other people have done histories of wine. How did you decide to make yours different? I mean, Hugh Johnson famously wrote a history of wine, and Rod Phillips, a Canadian academic. How did you decide to make yours different? What was different about it?
Well, I mean, I know Rod vaguely. He's very good. But it's a thinnish paperback. Well, not thinnish; it's about that thick, and it covers the whole period. And he makes some extremely useful comments, which I didn't plagiarize because I gave him the credit for them. Yeah. But it wasn't the same sort of thing as both I and my publishers wanted, which was something that would be academic in a sense. In other words, I can't help but do it that way, but general enough so it would. Be attractive to a general public. Hugh's book, I read it years ago, first published in 1989, and it's a wonderful book, but it's a different sort of book. There's lots of pictures and maps, which I loved. But also it's a wonderful read, but it's not as, there's nothing on China. There's nothing on Asia. It's not very much on any particular subject except France. What a surprise! So mine is fuller,
more comprehensive.
That's
isn't it?
right. It has lots of pictures.
I haven't seen those yet because I've only got the proof copy.
Well, you'll get them soon.
Looking forward to this.
I only received this week the author's copy. So
Fantastic.
had I had it here, I would hold it up to you.
Yeah, and wave it at me.
It's
I
a
think
very
you're right.
handsome book.
But you say at the beginning that wine's history is extremely complicated. I just wonder how you decided what to include and what did you leave out? I mean, there are a few countries you've left out. I mean, in Uruguay, I think you said famously is not in there. Canada's not in there. Are some people going to be upset that they're not in there, do you think?
Well, possibly Canada, which has some wonderful Pinot Noirs up in British Columbia, the left-hand side of Canada, at least for us living from the United States. But Canadian wine it's very difficult to buy it abroad.
Yeah.
Indian wine is seen by the trade as a great consumer area. Although it too has some really good wines made by Sula, for example, Fratelli Brothers. But essentially, a producer had to make really good wine, but it had to be available, because there's no use in saying there's this great wine, too bad you can't find it. So it was those two categories. I did Asia. I found out all sorts of things. I mean, China is making some very good wine, as we both know. But it has some terrible wine, because adulteration and fraud is very, very widespread in China. Some of them are trying to fix it, obviously, but it's something you could not ignore. But I had to give, and I went back to when in 7000, when wine, as we have evidence that it might be the first wine, but it might not be grape pips. It might be hawthorn pips. But the Chinese, of course, claim it's the earliest wine. I was
very old, yeah.
Exactly. I was quite interested in Japan. I like the Koshu wine, which is delicate and white and crisp and quite wonderful. But also, Japan has the most mature wine market in Asia. They know a lot about it. They buy it. They drink it a lot. They drink it you might drink it evening with dinner. So I just found Asia extremely interesting, and you didn't have it on that.
I agree with you. But let's go right back to the beginning, the origins of wine. I mean, I really like your description of these sort of cavemen wandering around and seeing birds, eating wild grapes and thinking, maybe we'll have a go at it. Do we know when wine was invented, as you put it, or discovered?
Archaeology is a wonderful thing. And there are various sites that have been discovered over the past 30, 40, 50 years that grapes are there. They find old amphorae there, or shards of amphorae, and they can figure what they are. Because if on the inside, if they find, for example, some red stains, which probably mean tartaric acid, in the Middle East, that shows that there was wine in it. So they could track these things. And right now, Georgia in the Zagros Mountains are the winner. And I'm quite keen on that, because the very first, when Christianity was taken there, the very first cross was made of grapevine branches. I think that's so wonderful.
This is Saint Nino, isn't it?
Well, yes, she.
This is why half the women in Georgia are called Nino.
Yes, they still celebrate her. She wandered around Georgia, converting people.
Yeah, and you see crosses on hills which were on the route that she supposedly took through Georgia. But no, so I mean, this is a distinguish between these are wines made from domesticated grapes, right? Cultivated grapes, as opposed to wild grapevines, aren't they? Wild grapevines, we have no idea who the first cave person was who just came up with sticking some grapes in a hole in the ground and finding it fermented.
That's right, or it might have. Was it cross-pollinated by bees? The problem was that female vines could produce the fruit. Male vines could not. So what happened was they had to cross-pollinate. And then you had what were called domesticated grapes, which were, those of you who know about this and are keen on it, are Vitis vinifera. And that's the major wine grape. It was the ancestor of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Syrah and Cabernet Sauvignon. 99% of the grapes we use around the world are Vitis vinifera.
Yeah,
and they came from, I don't know, 8th century BC.
Right, amazing. I mean, we're recording this at sort of noon on a weekday, but I want to talk to you about drunkenness because I just wondered, was getting drunk, or at least being merry, part of wine's appeal from the start? I mean, I did a podcast with Edward Slingerland, who read a book, Drunk, and he argued that wine or alcohol's ability to encourage lateral thinking and make us more convivial has been essential to the development of civilization, which is a grand claim. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure about civilization, as it were, but depends on how you define that. If civilization is how you can get drunk and say something, okay. Yes, getting drunk. From the Egyptians to, Assyria and Persia, all the great empires and Mesopotamia, getting drunk for a man showed what a masculine man you were. I mean, there's a bit of this nowadays in pubs, is there not?
Yeah.
So the Egyptians even have on their tombs pictures of people drunk, in fact. And they took with them masses of wine into the afterlife because, of course, you needed wine. So tombs are rooms full of amphorae, full of wine. And they were probably, one of the ones we really know, because there are pictures of it, that getting drunk was a good thing. There's one woman's picture on one of the tombs. And she says, "Get me wine. I want 3 things. I need to vomit." Well, what can one say? And all the gods were supposed to get drunk because that was a good thing, which meant that their worshippers were supposed to get drunk because that was a good thing. And therefore, it just worked. The Persians thought that you made better judicial decisions than if you were sober. And I've wondered if that's the origins in vino veritas.
That's interesting. Yeah. And what about religion? Because you mentioned religion briefly, and they've been linked again since the earliest times. And it seems to be something that's in common to lots of different religions. I mean, including even Islam to a degree. I think you said in the book that there are more than 100 terms for wine in Arabic. I mean, was wine offered to the deities? Was it drunk in memory of the dead, with the Eucharist? I mean, how was it used in religions?
Well, it was used, the Muslims, although not so much, it depends. By the 11th century, there were various categories of Muslims, such as in Persia, which stopped wine to the extent that they could. But the Christians use it, of course, in the Eucharist. Other religions used wine. The point is that Noah, to the Christians, was the first winemaker, and therefore, and in the Bible it says that he made 5 hin, which is about 5 liters per hin, as far as I can work out. And therefore, if Noah and the Bible, required wine during 1,000 years in the Ottoman Empire, Jews and Christians were allowed to make wine, but no Muslims were, which meant that monasteries, for example, which served wine, Muslims would flock to them so they could drink wine there that were not allowed to do so in their own homes.
How
so
interesting.
Yes, I mean, wine and religion are still important today.
Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned health and people producing medicinal champagne and things like that during Prohibition. But I mean, wine today is considered bad for our health. I mean, even in moderation, according to some people, even prestigious health organisations, the World Health Organization. What would Hippocrates have made of that? I mean, what would the ancients have made of this idea that wine is actively doing you damage?
They would have thought it was bonkers.
Yeah.
I mean, wine, Hippocrates in 6th century BC, Galen, one of his pupils, whose books on wine and cures were dominant all through the medieval period, in fact. The point is, with wine, it was partly drinking it, but it was partly you could dissolve medicine in it, and no one would be able to taste it. So if you were if you were seen as too hot, there are certain wines that were seen as cooling you, and the vice versa, of course. Wine was incredibly important from 6th century BC, probably till, I don't know, you could say the 18th century. Remember, in the middle of the 9th century, and still in China, they have tonics, which are made of wine. In fact, so in certain little respects, it still is the case. But yes, it was the major medicine or conveyor of medicine, to the extent that in some, as in Prohibition, if they got wine as a tonic, they would put it in the fridge, and the the medicine part would separate from the wine itself. And that was, again, one way you could legally be able to drink.
And you'd throw the medicine away, would you, and drink the wine?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it was always healthier than water, wasn't it? I mean, on sea voyages, people drank wine rather than water.
Well, sea voyages, seawater will more or less kill you. And remember,
but I mean, even fresh water was not deemed particularly healthy on voyages. Was it that wine was considered more healthier?
They would put wine into water sometimes, for example. But yes, you're quite right that water could kill you during thousands of years. And if you had wine instead, that was seen as healthy. And also wine was seen as very calorific, which meant that in France, for example, the government wanted people to drink wine because that was, one of the ways they would get calories.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Let's talk about trading, because that's another interesting part of the book, where it was exported, if you like, from early on in its history, and partly down what would later be called the Silk Road. Who were the earliest exporters, and where do they go, and who bought it, as it were?
Well, the earliest evidence we have is a cave called Areni-1 in Armenia, which has wine presses, and it has a place where the juice would go down. It had amphorae, and it had drinking cups, and pips. So what more do you need? And I figure they're the first wine merchants. And they would send wine to Mesopotamia, for example, to Afghanistan. And I don't think that early down, who knows, down the Silk Road to China, but certainly all around there it started going. And one thing that was great that the Georgians did was wine got exported or taken by soldiers, whatever, through Turkey, and then on to Lebanon, or what was called the land of Canaan then. And then you get the Canaanites, which are some of my heroes, who then, with their ships, and they were the seafarers of the day, and they took it to Egypt. And after 150 years, one of the pharaohs decided they wanted Egypt to make wine. Well, the Canaanites went over there and showed them how to do vineyards and how to grow the grapes and make the wine. And so they did that. They did it with Crete. They would take wine, and they would take beautiful wine sets, cups and bowls and ladles and so forth, and to attract. And then their successors were the Phoenicians, who were essentially grew out of the Canaanites, and they were again great traders. And they took wine as far, they established Carthage, for example, and as far as Cadiz in the west side of Spain. And they were succeeded by the Greeks. And there was a lot of competition. And there are all sorts of shipwrecks all along the Mediterranean showing masses of amphorae and so forth. Yeah. So by the time it was the Romans, the Mediterranean knew about wine.
Was full of wine, yeah? Let's talk a little bit about empire. It's another important theme in the book, and the wine world wouldn't look the same without the Romans, the Spaniards, the French, the Dutch, Greeks, I suppose, in a way. I didn't know that the Dutch had developed so turn. That was one thing I learned from the book. And even the Brits, why do these Europeans want to take wine to other countries and other hemispheres?
Well, there were two reasons. One, of course, the health aspect. But more important, these were Europeans. They needed wine. They wanted wine. It was part of their lifestyle. So the conquistadores in Mexico or in South America, took along masses of vine cuttings with them because native grapes did not make good wine. In fact, they made dire wine.
And they realized that early on, did they?
So,
Yeah.
and the same thing happened in South America. And the winemaking went down from Mexico, New Mexico, that is, through Mexico, down through Peru, which was one of the great wine conveyors, and down to China,
Chile.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Argentina was taught by the Chileans how to make wine, and therefore South America became a great wine exporter in due course to other Spanish-speaking, back to Madrid, for example. The Dutch needed some place for their, Dutch East Indies. They were going all the way over to Malaysia and Jakarta, and they needed a place for their ships to stop, to get water, to get some meat. So they established in the Cape, what became the Cape Colony, a place to do this, and the next century they established various vineyards. In 1814, the British got Cape because the Dutch had allied with the French in the Napoleonic Wars, and so that was one of the things that Britain got. And the Dutch had used slavery, and the British kept it. Then independently, James Cook, who many might know as a great explorer, really discovered New Zealand and Australia. And essentially, the British liked having colonies that produced wine because mostly they had to buy wine from France, but they were the enemy, as you know, for centuries.
Hundreds of years, yeah.
That's right. And they preferred to pay to parts of the empire. So that's how that's how the British took care of wine in South America and South Africa.
And who was the first wine writer, the kind of Robert Parker of his day, if you like?
One of my favorite Romans, Pliny the Elder, who died, and mostly famous for dying in 89 AD from the Vesuvius. He was in charge of the ships there, and he went to take a look, and he got caught in the sulfur. So he died there. But more famous for many people, those who like the ingathering of information, he wrote a book of natural history. Well, book, nowadays, it was 37 books then. Now you can find it. It's really 10 volumes, and book 14 is devoted to vines and wines. And what he did, he had a lot about the various vines, the kinds of wines they made, and in Italy, some really bad wines. And what he did was to say, for example, that what's not important is the grape. It's the soil that you grow it in, terroir, in other words. And he established, for 5 centuries, he was the one you turn to. And of course, he didn't have Robert Parker's social media.
Reach.
It reached. It was. I have a volume on my shelf, in fact, because it tells you an awful lot about wine in the ancient history. And he was the one who gave you reasonably detailed. Wines from Greece are the best, for example. These Italian wines are good. Wines from, some other countries. And at that time, of course, French wines were not to be thought of.
No. And was he talking more about place than grape varieties? And they weren't so concerned with grape varieties in those days, were they?
Yes, they were. They were concerned. He and Virgil agreed on the best grape, for example. But he said straightforwardly, it's the place where it's grown. I mean, wines from Vesuvius on the outlying areas were really rather good, which we have now discovered in the past 50 years or so can make very good wine. But one good comment one of the great wines, considered the greatest one, was Falernian, which was made close to Campania and Rome, it was a mountain around there. And he said, it was a great wine, but the problem is that they started to make more. In other words, diluted it.
Overcropping.
And therefore, it declined in its quality. Unfortunately, those who only thought that Falernian is a great wine and you have it for banquets didn't care particularly, because everyone they knew thought it was great, so they bought lots of it. And wealthy men, and just spread it around his banquets. Pliny was the one who said, it's getting worse and worse.
Pliny is your man, yeah?
He's my man.
Who was the first serious wine collector? I'm wondering, when did people start buying wine to lay down? That came presumably with the invention of glass bottles, did it?
No, it came from the Egyptians with all their amphorae. If you go to various tombs and various places in Egypt, you'll find, from centuries before BCE. In terms of laying it down seriously, the shape of the bottles were important for port, for example, because they had bottles started sort of onion shaped, and over that century they got taller and less, and eventually they could be binned, which meant that you could keep vintage port, and this was in a cellar. That you could get it in. You would get it in casks and then bottle it, and that also led to the appearance of cellar books, so you could keep track of the wine you had. This is really sort of 17th century, 18th century. Voltaire, quite famous 18th century man, he had a cellar, and his favorite wine was Beaujolais, which I found quite funny.
Do you think he was laying that down or not? Possibly.
Well, that's where you had it to get to it. Yeah. Your butler or whatever went down and got it for you.
And a little bit about scandals. You mentioned Pliny and talking about overproduction. I mean, wine scandals, fraud, adulteration, got a long history too. I mean, you were talking about China as well, modern day. When did that adulteration start? Were they doing that in the ancient world? Were people cheating, do you think?
Well,
selling something, mislabeling things or whatever the equivalent would be?
Not. Yes, I mean, the Romans, for example, sent wine to what's called Provence and Languedoc and Roussillon, but then it was Narbonnensis. And they mostly wanted to sell it to the Gauls and the Germans. So what they would do, and tried to send it back to Italy, but it was too appalling, because people like now think that older bottles probably means better wine because they're aged. They would have them in areas and smoke them, so you got black. But also they added bitter aloe and other appalling herbs, and because they knew that the Gauls and the Germans didn't know any better. So they would send it there, and they were quite right to do so, because the wine in Gaul would cost, a barrel would cost a slave. So
one barrel was a slave.
That's right. Yeah. So the Romans would give them a barrel of wine, and they get a slave, and they could take them back to Rome and sell them to whomever they wished to sell them.
Very interesting chapter on Burgundy, and I learned a lot from reading that. And because I wanted to ask you if you can talk a little bit about that. Why is it that some regions are more famous than others, and wine regions like Burgundy slightly embellished their image and even their past a little, didn't they?
Well, I don't know how far back you'd like to go. My favorite is Burgundy in the 20th century, because after the First World War, Burgundy had always been a way place, where you go to get to the south. And so people went to Bordeaux, but they didn't go to Burgundy because there was nothing interesting there. So in the 1920s, a number of the Burgundian wine people decided tourism was what they should do. So they invented all sorts of inventions. And the main thing was the peasant farmer tied to his land, because in Bordeaux, of course, they were rich and so forth. And so they had all sorts of celebrations, the poulet of, the harvest, and also
A Pauline's like a dinner, isn't it? It's like a harvest dinner, really.
a big harvest
Yeah.
dinner, exactly. You still have them in Burgundy, but they are not peasant farmers who attend them. So that's essentially was the ideal of Burgundy. Was the farmer in his farming clothes and his hat who was tied to his land. And I'm not sure there was ever much talk about quality. What can I say?
Partly an invention, then, you're saying, really?
Practically wholly an invention. People still believe it, in fact. But Burgundy is, of course, really nice now. In many respects, you may not agree with this. I think it's vastly overpriced. For what
I do agree with you. Yeah.
But you get the myth. You get what they think, what they are pretending. No, not pretending. That's taken for granted in Burgundy now, I suspect. But you get that along with your bottle of wine. It's just not wine. It's part of the whole Burgundian, peasant farmer in their vineyards.
Yeah. The shtick, yeah. Each chapter in your book ends with a symbolic wine. I just wondered how you chose them and what each of them is there to illustrate, in a sense.
Well, my beginning idea was that they would have a grape that was characteristic. So my very first one, Bridiano, came from a grape that was only resuscitated by a family living on this Greek island. And I chose it partly because of that, is a very old grape, but also because it was sweet. And the early Greeks preferred sweet wines. So I thought that fit very well. Rome had a different one. Some of the wines, they had one called what is now Greco di Tufo. It's a very old wine that was made from the Greco grape, in fact. And Spain, for example, I can hardly remember, Tim. I think it might have been a Rioja.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
Yes. Or it might have been sherry. Could have been. I'm really keen on sherry. Portugal is port. Austria is the Gruner Veltliner, the characteristic Austrian grape. France, I had a Grand Cru claret because that symbolizes in many people's minds French wine.
And they're nice little mini essays in a way, aren't they? At the end of the chapter, really.
Plus the picture of the label. So if you want to follow it up,
you can go and buy it.
Exactly.
You should do a special case based on the book.
What a good idea!
Or a tasting. We should do a tasting based on the wines, modern examples of these or something like that. I want to ask you another question: is if you could go back in time to any period in history to look at some vineyards or taste a set of wines, where would you go?
Oh, golly! Well, I'm devoted to German wines, and one of the very earliest, 8th century, I think, was Schloss Johannesburg. And of course, those who've been to Germany or pictures can show on the Rhine vineyards that are like that.
Yeah,
and some,
steep. Yeah,
and some, in fact, winemakers, and I shan't name who, had to tie ropes around them to the vines so they wouldn't go all the way down to the Rhine. German wines. From the Rheingau and from the Mosel, in fact, which is not on the Rhine, were the most expensive wines up through till the 20th century. There was a famous, auctions to wines, and these German wines were more expensive than French clarets. They were the wine. This was killed off partly by the First World War.
And then Liefraumilch, Niersteiner Gutes Domton, and all those
that
things.
was post.
Later.
Yes,
And so would you go to Schloss Johannesburg in the 8th century to see it being planted?
Yes, I'd like to. And there's a number of others I would like to go to. Lorsch and the point is that they were all along the Rhine. And the Rhine, by that time, up to, 12th, 13th century, there were all these monasteries who were the bases of these wines, produced wines. And they would put them on ships, and they didn't have to pay tolls. And the Rhine eventually was called a river of wine. In fact, they went, towards, I don't know, Vienna and by the Danube, all sorts of places. And indeed, it's hard to say. Depends on the currents, but probably up to Scandinavia as well.
Wow, amazing. Final question is that your book ends in 2025, and you were still writing it presumably at the end of last year. I just wonder how you think the wine world is going to develop over the next 50 years, and which factors are going to shape its future?
Well, partly at this point, the drinking of wine has been declining all over the world. 2023, the amount of wine drunk by the Chinese declined by 25%. In fact, French don't drink as much wine. The young kids prefer soft drinks. In America, a lot of it is a question of wellness. The U.S. is not a wine country. They're a spirit country. Only about 25%, in fact, drink any sorts of alcohol at all. So as a consuming country, it's not so good. And the growth of low alcohol and no alcohol wines, which may I say, possibly I shouldn't, I think is a fraud, because you need alcohol to give the body, to give the flavor, to give the staying power. And if you're going through various ways of getting rid of that alcohol, I don't know how many people drink it because they're keen on that. They want the flavor and not the alcohol. So there are all sorts of cultural reasons. But lately, it's been going up again. Many countries haven't stopped drinking wine. Some of the bigger countries have produced a lot of worries about this. You're right. The World Health Organization says that a glass of wine will cause cancer. This is just stupid. Because other studies have said, a glass of red wine a day is rather good for you.
Exactly.
So it depends on who gets the newspaper coverage in some way. But I think, if I may say so, I think it's going to last because whether hundreds of thousands of people or millions around the world like wine. And therefore, I do think it has a future. I think more countries are going to be producing wine. More countries are going to be drinking wine. So I myself am not worried about the future of wine.
That's fantastic to hear. Before we go, because it was amazing, I learned so much, and we could spend 10 hours talking about this book. When is the book published? It's October, Wine: A Global History, and available from all good booksellers. And who's the publisher?
It's Profile. I should say that it's available the 1st of October in the US, in the UK, 13th of October in the US. And at this point, both Japan and Portugal have gained the rights to translations.
Fantastic.
So years after that.
I hope it's the massive success it deserves to be. It's an incredible piece of work. Thank you for spending 5 years of your life writing it, because it's a book that we really needed. So it's fantastic to see and to hear just how the book came about, really, and how you create it and all the work that's gone into it. It's been brilliant talking to you. And I hope we can share a glass of Riesling again soon, because that prum that I had with you last weekend at a friend's house was delicious.
I told you I'm a German devotee, and I'm a Riesling devotee, in fact.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, I really enjoyed reading my proof copy of the book, and I learned so much about the history of wine. So make sure you put your order in now. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is marketing guru Mike Poole, who'll be talking to me about his 50-year career in wine. Join me then.
Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.